it's Kevin with GatheringMagic.com, here with this week's episode of the Rogue's Alley. So I'm actually going to take a very known shell that's doing quite well because it matches up good versus green-black Delirium, and turn this into a different sort of feel with, we're going to play an Angel build with the Aetherworks Marvel. So I was noticing a lot of the decks that are very popular in the metagame right now with green-black Delirium and especially White Flash have an incredibly hard time to deal with a flipped Bruna. So basically what a flipped Bruna does is it has flying, first strike, visionless, lifelink, and your opponent cannot cast spells with converted mana cost 3 or less. So that's super important right now in the format because that's Stasis Snare, that's Reflector Mage, that is to a point Spell Queller. I don't think our deck cares too much about Spell Queller. That is Murder, Ruinous Path, Liliana, just basically any removal, any way to get rid of Bruna. The card of choice to cast is going to be converted mana cost 3 or less. So if you can get a Bruna out and have it flip at your end step, a lot of decks have a very difficult time to deal with it. Now, I'm not quite certain this is going to be any sort of special has any advantages over the Emrakul list with the green-red Aetherworks Marvel. But I thought we'd try to spice it up a bit and just test to see if my intuition is correct that Bruna is going to be pretty much a broken card in the format with the particular metagame. If you look at other decks too, like the green-red Energy or the even go into the vehicles decks, you can shut down a ton of cards just with the converted mana cost 3 or less. So yeah, you can just completely lock a lot of opponents out. So I'm not going to put Emrakul in here, even in the sideboard, for a reason, just because we want to focus on the testing. I think the temptation would be too much against certain matchups to side it out and put like the Emrakul build in. I am, however, still going to run two Ulamogs and World Breakers. I think that they're kind of like these catch-all cards. There are some trickier matchups with this deck, and these give us some outs. A Sigarda Heron's Grace is also kind of cool in this one because it's great versus the mirror because opposing Emrakuls actually cannot target you. It says target opponent, and so you have Hexproof versus Emrakul. Let's just pull up Emrakul really quickly. And then this is when you cast Emrakul, you gain control of target opponent during the next turn. After that turn, that player takes an extra turn. So Emrakul cannot target us, so it is a 13/13 flying trample protection from instant's body, but again, it doesn't take our turn, doesn't really mess with what we're trying to do, and I thought the Sigarda at least deserves a slot in the sideboard for that reason. It also helps versus like Transgress, Distended Mindbender. There are a few cards that can be very problematic for the deck to deal with, and the Sigarda actually dodges two things. It dodges Chandra, as well as it dodges the Grasp of Darkness, so I think it's actually worthwhile. You never know when you exile a card to your graveyard to create a 1/1. This deck actually fills up the graveyard quite quickly. You can use it to create a 1/1 and then chump block for Marvel. I don't know if that's going to be significant or not, but we'll have to wait and see. So I thought about putting in the other Angel that when you play a Plains, maybe we'll just try it in the sideboard. Let's see what this one's called. I know that it is, let's see here, Marius Shepherd. Marius Shepherd's interesting with this list too because it's another 7-drop, which is right where Aetherworks Marvel wants to be. I mean, you theoretically cast cards with 7. That's why Emrakul started to get the nod over Ulamog, because Ulamog can get stuck in your hand with Aetherworks Marvel, whereas with Delirium, with Artifact, Enchantment, Instant, Sorcery, Creature in the graveyard, Emrakul is not that hard to cast. Land in the graveyard, that reduces it by 6, and you're casting it for 7. Marius Shepherd is kind of cool because it says whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you may return target non-land permanent from your graveyard to your hand. If that land is a Plains, you may return that non-land permanent card to the battlefield instead. So I think I'm gonna run a 1-0s for funsies. Maybe we'll put it in the main and just bring a Linvala over the sideboard, and I'm just gonna cut a Tireless Tracker. So we'll have to wait and see if this actually works. I'm pretty light on Plains. The only thing we have is 2 Canopy Vistas. Evolving Wilds can go get a Plains, which actually Evolving Wilds is incredibly powerful with Marius Shepherd because it returns a non-land permanent, and then you can crack it for a Plains and then landfall and bring it back to the battlefield. So yeah, we'll try a 1-of, see if it's actually quite cool. So in this deck, so Yeah, even bringing back Vessel doesn't seem too terrible. Bringing back Woodweaver's Puzzleknot. No, of course, if Marvel's in the graveyard, that's a way that we can abuse it. So, if you're not familiar with how Aetherworks Marvel decks happen, they've kind of transitioned. The old school Teamer version used to be packed full of Ulamogs and Emrakuls and high casting, and it was kind of like the all-in type strategy where you wanted a turn 3, preferably Marvel, that would hit an Emrakul or an Ulamog. These later brews have actually been a lot less converted mana cost. They run a lot of Chandras. Chandra does double duty because it can add the mana to then cast the higher converted mana cost, again, in Emrakul. So you're reducing the cost by everything in the graveyard. Vessel's usually there. Woodweaver's Puzzle's there. So enchantment, artifact. Vessel's probably found some other things. And then Chandra actually will add 2 more mana, cast the Emrakul, and you don't have to entirely rely on the Aetherworks Marvel at that point. We're going to forego running Chandra. I'm running the Chandra Flamecaller because we're not running Kozilek's Return, as we're not running Emrakul, so there's no Kozilek's Return. And what we're going to try to do is stabilize through Angels. So we have 2 great stabilization cards. One is Linvala, the Preserver, and the other one is Gisela. That's where we're going to run quite a few of each. Gisela is really good in this deck because you can get it out of turn 3 Gisela, and that's pretty good versus a ton of decks at the moment. It's good versus Gideon, and you can always attack into Gideon if Gideon only +0s. It is very good against anything with U-White Flash because it first strikes everything down. Not the greatest versus Archangel Avacyn, but it also does first strike down the Grim Flayers and the majority of things in that. It doesn't do that well versus the Demon, the Mindrak Demon, but let's just pull it up really quickly with the Gisela. But flying first strike lifelink, even if you get in that for first strike lifelink damage to your opponent, you're usually up. They'll at least give you a turn. It still blocks the Smuggler's Copters quite well. It dies to most things in the game. That's why I don't really like Gisela, but Gisela with Bruna is a really great combo, and we're going to try to put it in the graveyard through Vessels and Tormenting Voice, or just naturally rely on the Gisela going to the graveyard by removal. And then if they get it in the graveyard with removal, then Bruna's going to bring it back, and Brazella is what we're the end goal for this deck. So again, I don't know how well this deck is going to work. It's completely untested. We are just shoving this in the green-red Aetherworks shell, so there's that. But we'll queue this up and see how well it does. This is Kevin with GatheringMagic.com. Thanks for watching.